Good morning, I'm John Valentine from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and I'm the point of contact both to the CVT as well as to NA22 at large. It's very exciting to see all the progress that's been made over the last 2 years with the CVT and to see all the student involvement that's happening. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to talk about a project that we've been doing with Cameron Miller from University of Michigan that folds into a significant effort at Lawrence Berkeley Lab to develop monoenergetic photon sources as an alternative to the high energy, meaning multi-MeV photon sources that are used in cargo radiography applications today, but also to enable photofission-based active interrogation work and potentially in the long run, nuclear resonance fluorescence interrogation efforts. So we pursue a technology based on laser plasma accelerators for generating monoenergetic photons. Dick has a different approach using isotopic or nuclear reaction sources. We've in the last 2 years had a project with NA22 to look across the application, the nuclear nonproliferation application space, and look at where monoenergetic photon sources might have a big impact, and therefore where we should focus the development of such sources moving forward. So about 2 years ago, we started out by looking across the NA22 stakeholder space and talking to a number of those users, both the folks at the national labs that end up serving those user communities, as well as the sponsors in Washington, D.C. We identified on the order of 15 applications where monoenergetic photons could have an impact, and then did an initial sorting of those to identify the high priority ones where we thought that the impact was largest. And that project has been led by Cameron Geddes at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. It's a multi-lab project with Lawrence Livermore, Idaho National Lab, and Pacific Northwest National Labs. And Cameron Miller from Michigan was the CVT student who worked with us. So out of those 15 or so applications, we identified 4 high priority applications that are receiving further modeling and simulation attention, and those include the cargo screening, which is kind of a classic radiography, potentially active interrogation mode. That's being led by Lawrence Livermore. Detection of hidden SNM, so this is trying to do a single-sided inspection. So if the Secret Service was trying to clear a route for the president and there was a suspect vehicle along the side of the road, could you use this type of source to say, we don't believe there's a significant amount of special nuclear material there. Led by Idaho National Lab. Warhead dismantlement and verification, which can be also coupled with some of the stockpile stewardship interest in doing radiography of components and weapons, and that's been led by PNNL. And the task then that Cameron Miller has contributed to is led by Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and that's looking at spent nuclear fuel dry storage casks and trying to, if there's a loss of continuity of knowledge for a cask, can we verify how many assemblies are actually in that dry storage cask? So a nuclear safeguards application. So here's the two Camerons, Cameron Miller in front and Cameron Geddes in the back. And as I said, so we're looking at verifying the number of fuel bundles in a dry storage cask. And these are enormous containers. They vary in shape and size and orientation. So some of them are stored vertically like this, and others are stored horizontally. And so how the CONOPS for how you would use a photon source will vary, particularly based on these two orientations. So in a horizontal orientation, you can imagine putting the source on one end and longitudinally looking through that container and putting the detector on the other end. When you have it vertical, you can't get the detector or the source on the bottom, so you have to look through from the side. And so Cameron has done a beautiful job of doing some calculations and simulations to look at both of those approaches, and I'll briefly show some of his results here. and then move on to some general conclusions that we have and some open areas for further research. So here's the horizontal orientation where we can use a longitudinal beam through the container. So we modeled an assembly that has fuel pins, has gaps between the pins as well as guide tubes. And you can see if we start with an 8 MeV source, we can get a few orders of magnitude difference in the transmission or the attenuation through that through the fuel or through the assembly and the cask. And so while that attenuation, 10 to the negative or 10th transmission is enormous, it is not unreasonable with the parameters that we're working with in our current sources of 3 times 10 to the 8th the photons per pulse, operating at on the order of a kilohertz, to be able to, in a reasonable amount of time, be able to make a statistically significant measurement there. So it's one thing that's important to understand in this particular application, time isn't all that important. If you have a fuel cask and you want to verify how many assemblies are there, you could spend weeks, or you'd prefer to do it in hours, but it's not a time-critical operation like some of the other applications certainly are. So one of the advantages of the laser plasma, and ultimately it's really the Thomson scatter or inverse Compton scatter technique, is that you end up with a narrow divergence, angular divergence beam, and that allows a pencil beam effectively to be put into the container and go through pretty close to just going through a single fuel pin all the way through the container. For the vertical, we looked at a different approach, and now you look at a fan beam, or you look at a pencil beam going through, and then varying the angle of that beam through the spent cask, and you can see that a pattern emerges for how much material the beam has to go through in order to get out to the other side, and missing fuel bundles leave a pretty distinct signature. And so you can also imagine that rotating around, and you can get multiple views of that and start to pretty distinctively identify missing fuel bundles. And again, so within reasonable range of today's parameters, we think it's possible. So some general conclusions from the study overall. For these 4 applications that received more attention, all seem to be addressable with the kind of the next generation of photon source that we're building. Being able to have a 1 to 15 MeV tunable energy gets you access to the energy ranges that you need to have an impact on those applications. Energy spread, and generally energy spread on the 10 to 50% range is good enough for most of those applications. For NRF, you need to get down below 2% energy spread, and in some cases even tighter energy spread to really have access to lots of different lines distinctively. The narrow pencil beam has lots of advantages. These are kind of the range of parameters that you need to get there. And ultimately, what the study has ended, but there are still a number of open questions remaining that are ripe for students to get involved in. And in fact, we're working as we speak on developing Cameron's work into a PhD dissertation topic, and a number of the things up here came out of the study and could easily go the same route. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Contain our core competencies in S&T, and these are our 7 core competencies as we currently list them, from high energy density science, advanced materials and manufacturing, bioscience and bioengineering, nuclear, chemical, and